With virtual reality headsets becoming increasingly more affordable and available to consumers, many are predicting that virtual sex will soon become ubiquitous. Virtual reality can also be used to aid sex research and education, as demonstrated by these talks held at LSR 2022.
So what do we mean by virtual reality? Well, VR is a human-computer interface involving three-dimensional immersive environments that aim to elicit psychological and behavioral responses that are analogous to being in the real world. Unfortunately, to date, there haven't been too many studies that have specifically examined the differential effects of 2D versus 3D virtual reality erotica. One was done in a small sample of heterosexual men comparing 3D versus 2D erotica. And they found that compared to viewing traditional 2D erotica, videos viewed using VR resulted in higher levels of physiological arousal, subjective arousal, a feeling of general presence, as well as sexual presence. This then led to another study that was done on both men and women, and this study also compared the impact of 2D versus 3D VR on men and women. Interestingly, subjective sexual arousal increased with the virtual reality for men only and not for women, whereas both men and women experienced a significant increase in general presence when viewing the VR versus the traditional 2D erotica. And finally, looking at general presence from the first-person point of view compared to a third-person point of view, it was higher with the first-person point of view for both men and women when looking specifically at general presence. So this led us to design our current study, and the question that we posed was, does women-produced erotica impact these four domains, a feeling of general presence, sexual arousal, and sexual desire? And we specifically explored stimulus modality, that is looking at VR versus 2D, and we also explored point of view. The participants in our study were 38 undergraduates. These were all cisgender identifying women with a mean age of just under 21. They came into the lab, completed an online questionnaire, and had one in-laboratory session where they were explained the VR apparatus by a trained graduate student who then left the room and provided instructions through an intercom system to the individual while they were viewing the films. Participants viewed 4 videos that were each 5 minutes in length, and they were separated by 2-minute nature videos. 2 videos were in the 3D environment that involved a 180-degree immersive environment, and one of those was from a first-person point of view through the eyes of the female actor that was engaging in the sexual act, and the other film was from a third-person point of view, in which women watched a couple engaging in sexual acts, and they viewed them from a bit of a distance. There were also 2 videos in the 2D format. These were also shown in the VR headset, but they were displayed on a 2D virtual TV screen in a virtual living room. It was as if the person was watching the film on a TV screen. Similarly, we had videos in the 2D modality in the first-person point of view as well as the third-person point of view. The videos were viewed in 3D versus 2D blocks, and the order of blocks was randomized. After viewing each film, participants rated their own experience of how generally present they felt, how much sexual presence they felt, how sexual aroused they felt, as well as both dyadic and solitary levels of sexual desire. So let's unpack the results now. Starting with general presence, we found a significant main effect of stimulus modality for 3 out of the 4 subscales for general presence, specifically spatial, engagement, and naturalness, such that ratings were higher in the 3-dimensional VR compared to the 2D environments. We found no difference across the 3D, VR, and 2D videos for the negative effects subscale of general presence. We also found, looking specifically at sexual presence, scores were higher for the 3D VR compared to the 2D videos, and that point of view impacted sexual presence, such that sexual presence was significantly higher for videos depicting the first-person point of view, but only when 2D videos were viewed first. Looking now first at sexual arousal, we found that arousal scores were significantly higher when viewing 3D VR films with no effect of point of view. For sexual desire, we did not find any main effect of stimulus modality, but we did observe an interaction of stimulus modality and order of exposure, specifically when VR was viewed in block 1. Then dyadic desire scores were higher in the second block when they viewed the 2D films. Whereas when the 2D videos were watched first, then again, desire was higher in the second block when they viewed the VR block. Overall, these findings suggest that dyadic desire increased over time, in other words, in the second block compared to the first block, and there was no effect found on solitary sexual desire. Finally, although not shown here, higher levels of sexual arousal were associated positively with more sexual presence. In other words, the more sexually present people reported feeling, the higher their self-reports of sexual arousal. So what can we conclude based on these findings? So first of all, 3D virtual reality technology has the potential to increase the salience of erotic videos and result in higher levels of sexual presence, which in turn may bring about enhanced feelings of sexual arousal, as we saw in that last correlation. Utilizing virtual reality erotica to boost levels of sexual arousal may provide an improved and alternative to traditional research methods by creating a more realistic experience for people in the lab. And the high degree of ecological validity and control that's permitted by VR may enable possible therapeutic applications, such as exposure-based treatments of sexual dysfunction. Thanks for your attention today.
So virtual reality, referred to as VR, is a technology that uses real-time computer graphics and sensory inputs to immerse the user in a three-dimensional virtual environment. Why is that exciting? Well, VR allows researchers to study how people respond to situations that are not easily simulated within the lab. And recent innovations in VR technology have made it much more accessible. As a result, there's been a proliferation of VR research, especially within psychology and neuroscience. However, only a handful of VR studies include sexual stimuli, so VR sex research is lagging behind. And in particular, we have limited knowledge about how women respond to VR sexual scenes. VR sexual scenes are realistic and invoke a feeling that one is actually there within the scene. And other health disciplines, namely psychology, have really capitalized on the sense of presence that VR stimuli evoke by developing virtual reality exposure therapy, or VRET, which immerses individuals in a 3D simulation of their feared situation. And research suggests that VRET is similarly effective as real-life exposure for specific phobias. Although anxiety and fear is a central component of many sexual problems, we actually haven't embraced VRET in our field at all. So I'm left wondering, could VR erotica be used in a VRET program for fear-based sexual dysfunction? This is the first study in a series that aims to answer that question. And as an initial step, we needed to understand whether a control sample experienced anxiety in response to VR erotica. So we conducted a secondary data analysis to understand whether a non-clinical sample of women experienced anxiety in response to erotica and how their anxiety was affected by stimulus modality and point of view. And for hypotheses, due to the high sense of realism and presence elicited by VR, we predicted that one would report more anxiety in response to the VR relative to the 2D videos. And for VR videos only, because videos shown from the first-person perspective place the participant in a virtual body that was not under their control, we predicted that one would report greater anxiety after viewing sexual encounters from the first relative to the third-person perspective. Participants included a convenient sample of 38 cisgender women recruited from the psychology human subject pool. And for procedures, women completed a survey that asked questions about demographics, anxiety, and past sexual experiences. And then they came into the lab, put on a VR headset, and viewed erotic and non-erotic nature videos in a private room. For the erotic videos, they were able to choose whether they wanted to view a man and a woman engaging in sexual activity or two women. They viewed 4 erotic videos 5 minutes in length, separated by 2-minute nature videos. And for video modality, for the 2D condition, when we're actually in a virtual room that contained a TV screen, and the video is played on that screen. Whereas for the VR condition, when we're immersed within the scene itself. To give you an idea of what that would look like, there are images taken from the 2D and VR nature videos on the screen. So state level anxiety was assessed using the 6-item state subscale of the State Trait Anxiety Index, or SSTAI, and participants completed that measure before and after each erotic video. To examine the effects of video characteristics on women's anxiety levels, we subjected SSTI scores to a repeated measures analysis of variance. Modality, POV, and time served as within-subject factors, each with 2 levels. Moving on to results, briefly, here are the sample demographics. And then focusing on clinical characteristics, women's scores on the anxiety subscale of the depression, anxiety, and stress scales, which women completed a day before their lab session, reflected mild anxiety symptoms. Approximately 30% of the sample reported a history of non-consensual sexual contact, and 3 participants disclosed sexual difficulties, which included difficulties reaching orgasm as well as low desire. Before delving into the findings, let's talk about the graph. Light gray bars show pre-video SSTI scores, whereas blue bars indicate post-video scores. Higher scores suggest greater state-level anxiety. So the repeated measures ANOVA revealed a significant main effect of time, such that women's anxiety scores significantly increased from pre to post-video across all conditions. But that 2-way interaction was qualified by a 3-way interaction between time, modality, and POV. And a post hoc examination of that 3-way interaction revealed that the greater increase in anxiety scores for the VR videos was mostly attributable to the VR first-person film. Specifically, the pre to post video increase in anxiety scores for the VR first-person video was twice as large as the increase seen in other conditions. We observed a main effect of time, such that women's state-level anxiety increased in response to each film. And regarding stimulus modality, although a 2-way interaction indicated that women had greater pre-to-post video increases in state-level anxiety for VR, a closer examination of the higher-level 3-way interaction revealed that that was driven in large part by women's response to the VR first-person video. What are the implications? Well, when a non-clinical sample of cisgender women come into the lab and put on a VR headset, they experience an increase in anxiety in response to 2D and VR erotic films. But both modality and perspective matter, such that VR videos from the first-person perspective elicited the greatest anxiety. Although we don't know exactly why that is, there are likely a few factors at play. Women felt like they were in a virtual body and that the things happening to that body likely were out of their control. And it does feel like the other actor is actually on top of you in that condition, so it's likely a virtual space violation as well. And I imagine that attraction plays a role here too, right? I think how attracted a woman felt to the actor probably played into how much or how little anxiety she felt. But why do these findings matter? Well, these findings suggest that VR first POV films could be used in VRT programs aiming to treat fear-based sexual concerns. Vaginismus might be a key candidate, so vaginismus involves a specific fear of vaginal penetration. So could VR exposure to feared sexual scenes, namely vaginal penetration, help folks with vaginismus work through their fear and generalize their learning to real life, allowing them to engage in penetrative sexual activity with partners? That's what we're exploring in the VIVID study, and I'd love to chat about it if you're interested.